Ammunition is 4 basic parts to your cartridge. We firstly have the bullet, the cartridge case, the gunpowder, and the primer. Ammunition can be separated into two general types. We have what we call center fire and rim fire. Center fire is where the primer is located in the center of the case. So the firing pin will strike or locate in the center of the rear of the cartridge. And then your rim fire is where your priming residue is on the outer edge of the case, for instance on a .22. In modern day, your .22 is the only rim fire that we have, and then the rest are all center fires. The case is generally a brass, steel or copper cylinder closed at one end containing the other 3 components. Your primer contains a very sensitive explosive compound called lead stiffenate. When struck, the compound changes chemical structure and disintegrates completely, causing an explosion or a flash. In essence, what your primer does, it explodes. Your powder, modern day powder, is called nitrocellulose. And this powder, when it is ignited by the primer, creates heat and gas and steam. And with this, it creates pressure. That buildup of pressure then forces the bullet out through the end of the barrel. The bullet is the projectile and is generally made of a lead jacketed with a harder metal, and the expanding gases force it from the barrel. How this cartridge works now. The operation of the cartridge is based on the hammer hitting the firing pin. The firing pin in turn hits your primer. The primer then explodes. By the explosion of the primer, the gunpowder is ignited. When this gunpowder is ignited, the gunpowder burns and creates great quantities of gas which expand very rapidly. Now your primer explodes, but your gunpowder burns. When it burns, it creates this great quantity of gas which causes pressure, and in so doing forces the bullet out through the end of the barrel. The reason why your gunpowder burns is so that it can accelerate the bullet down the length of the barrel. We have 3 different classifications of gunpowders. You have fast, medium, and slow burning powders. Now, to give you an example, on a short-barreled firearm like a 2-inch snubby revolver, you would generally use a faster burning powder because the bullet doesn't have long to travel through the barrel. So you need something that's burning fast to accelerate the bullet down. On a longer barrel, we'd use a slower burning powder because should you use a fast burning powder in a long barrel, your bullet may get halfway or 3/4 way down the barrel and nothing's driving the bullet anymore. So that's the reason why we have the 3 different classifications of gunpowders. When we discuss bullets now, bullet we mean in the actual bullet itself, the head. We get different classifications of bullets, and obviously we get different kinds of abbreviations for these. We're looking at 2 forms of bullets that we generally look at. In terms of ballistics, we'll discuss this now. We're looking at what we call hard targets and soft targets. Now, should you be shooting at a hard target, we'd use what we call a full metal jacket, which is your lead covered with a copper jacket, and that is to maintain its integrity so that when it's going through the solid object, it stays whole as much as possible. On soft targets, we'd use a hollow point. Now, the idea of a hollow point bullet is that once it hits a soft target, the bullet will expand. So the main reason why we'd use full metal jackets is for hard targets, and soft targets we'd use a hollow point so that the transfer of energy is much greater in soft flesh. So for instance, in hunting, if the bullet stays within the body or the flesh that it's hit, it transfers a lot more energy as opposed to the bullet going clean through. So there is a whole list of different types of bullets that we get, and obviously you can familiarize yourself with that in our manual. You'll see that all the different types of bullets are listed there. With ballistics, there are 4 main parts of ballistics. And we're just going to cover this very briefly because ballistics, we could spend the next God knows how many hours on explaining ballistics. But basically we have what we call interior ballistics, we have intermediate ballistics, exterior and terminal ballistics. Your interior or your internal ballistics covers from the time that your bullet or your firing pin hits your primer and the primer explodes. It covers from there till the bullet exits in the barrel. So your internal pressures inside your barrel would relate to interior ballistics. Now, your handguns vary anything from 18 to 43,000 psi of pressure. And this will give you a good understanding as to why and how far that bullet can go. Now, your interior ballistics will also cover the rifling inside the barrel, which gives the bullet a rotational force, or what we call gyroscopic force. And it's that gyroscopic force or rotational direction of the bullet that will give you stability in flight. So just to recap again, your internal ballistics or interior ballistics covers from the time the firing pin hits the primer to the detonation of the primer and the bullet traveling through the barrel. And once the bullet exits the barrel, we now move into another domain of ballistics, and that would be called intermediate ballistics. Now, intermediate ballistics is the effect that the gases will have on the atmosphere once the bullet has now left the barrel. It's not really covered extensively, but just to give you an idea that there is intermediate ballistics, and that's the gases having an effect on the atmosphere as the bullet leaves. Your exterior ballistics covers from the time the bullet exits the barrel to the time it hits its intended target. So the flight of the bullet and the trajectory or the path that the bullet follows would be your exterior or external ballistics. Now in handguns, your handguns can vary in terms of distance. Anything from 2 to 2.5 kilometers would be the average maximum distance of a handgun bullet. We've obviously heard in the past of stories, people firing shots up in the air where bullets have gone up and come down and killed people. We have the notorious story of Ellis Park where the rugby player was shot in the chest from the Ponte building. That bullet traveled 2,100 meters. So bullets can travel fair distances. Rifles are dangerous, anything from 6 to 7 to 8 kilometers. Now, to give you maximum projection of your bullet, if you wanted to measure how far that bullet would go, in a vacuum, you would aim the gun or angle the gun at about 45 degrees. That would give you maximum projection of your bullet. But because of wind resistance, 45 degrees wouldn't give you maximum projection. So at an angle of between 25 and 29 degrees, and that's not much of an angle if you think about it, that bullet will give it its optimum distance, between 25 to 29 degrees. Once the bullet now hits the intended target, this is now called terminal ballistics. And terminal ballistics is once the bullet now hits, what effect does this bullet have on its intended target? So there again we cover what we call the hard targets and the soft targets. Hard targets meaning car doors, your front door in your home, wooden doors, and obviously soft targets we'll be looking at flesh. Now, different types of shapes of bullets in terms of your hollow points or your full metal jackets will give you different variations of penetration and different variations of expansion. Now, there's a whole variety of different full metal jackets and hollow points, and it will be up to you to decide or get advice from your dealer or your trainer as to which is the best ammunition to keep in your firearm. Hunting, again, there's a variety of different bullets and there's lots of different methodologies, and I'll tell you now, each and every hunter will have his own story about which bullet is the best and which performs the best. At the end of the day, I guess it's going to come down to your experience and your knowledge in terms of what your ammunition can do. Malfunctions of the cartridge, this would relate to all cartridges, whether they're handgun, shotgun, or rifle. The first malfunction we have is called a misfire. A misfire of the three is the most common. We see misfires at least once, if not 5 times a week on the shooting range. A misfire is a faulty primer which fails to ignite entirely. So the firing pin hits the primer does not ignite, so therefore your powder cannot burn and your bullet cannot leave the barrel. So a misfire is a complete failure of the primer to ignite. The second malfunction is called a hang fire, and a hang fire is a delayed chemical action for the primer to ignite your gunpowder. These, on the other hand, are very rare. Your chances of seeing a hang fire is minimal, but do understand that it is a possibility, and we like to make our learners aware of this. And what a hang fire is, when the firing pin hits the primer delays, and we normally give it around a 5-second safety period. So should the gun not fire on the range, your immediate action drill should be to maintain the muzzle in a safe direction, wait for 5 seconds. If it doesn't detonate after 5 seconds, we would assume that it's a misfire. The military, in terms of their detonators for grenades or for rocket launchers, they give it a 30-second safety period because they've had some that have gone off after 30 seconds. From personal experience and from what I've seen and read, generally your hang fires take around a second. So from the time the firing pin hits the primer, about a second later the cartridge will discharge. But on the shooting range, we like to give it a 5-second safety period. Your squib, on the other hand, is where there's no gunpowder or contaminated gunpowder in your cartridge. The firing pin hits the primer detonates. Now the primer releases enough energy to push your bullet either a quarter or halfway down your barrel. Now because there's no gunpowder in there, or the gunpowder has been contaminated through moisture, old age, maybe you've had too much oil in your magazine which has seeped into your cartridge. Now if the powder doesn't detonate, the primer has enough energy to push it into the barrel and it makes a very muffled plopping sound. Now on the shooting range with earmuffs on and other people firing, you may not recognize that sound. And what people generally do then is they assume it's a misfire, they then load another round into the chamber and fire again. Now what could result from this is either a bulged barrel, a split barrel, or a blown barrel. Because realize that your pressures now are almost doubled when the bullet is passing through the barrel. The way to distinguish between a misfire and a squib is if the gun does not fire, we wait 5 seconds on the shooting range. If you pull the slide back and an empty case comes out, we need to then consider where's the bullet. And generally the case will be pretty dark in color because the gases that are pushing the bullet down tend to go past or blow past the case, and the case becomes very black in color. A misfire, on the other hand, would be the gun would not fire, we wait 5 seconds, on pulling the slide back, if a full cartridge comes out with the bullet still intact in the case, that would be a misfire. So that would be an easy way for you to distinguish between a misfire and a squib.